Right now, approximately 50 million Americans over the age of 55 wake up every single morning and do the same thing before they even get out of bed. They pause, they calculate, they think, okay, how bad is it going to be today? Then they stand up and their knees answer. That sound, that low grinding crack that travels up through the bone like a door hinge that hasn't been touched in a decade, has become so familiar that most people have stopped flinching at it. They've made peace with it. They filed it under getting older and moved on. And then there's the stiffness. That first 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes every morning when walking feels like your legs belong to someone else. You shuffle to the kitchen. You hold the counter. You wait for your body to remember how to be a body. You've been to doctors. You've had x-rays. And here is what you were told, almost word for word, in one form or another. There's some wear in the cartilage. It's normal for your age. Keep moving. Consider an anti-inflammatory. If it gets worse, we can talk about options. Options. That word carrying the weight of a surgical suite. Here is what nobody told you at that appointment. The cartilage is not the cause. The cartilage is the result. It is the last structure to fail in a process that started much earlier, sometimes decades earlier, in systems that have nothing to do with your knee and everything to do with what your body stopped absorbing, stopped activating, and stopped protecting. And the starting point of that process is a mineral, one specific mineral that most Americans over 60 are severely deficient in, that your diet provided in reasonable quantities 30 years ago, and that the combination of processed food, changed agricultural soil, and one specific drug category taken daily by tens of millions of people has quietly pulled from your body over the course of an entire generation. Subscribe and hit the like button. This channel exists to give you what a 12-minute appointment cannot, the full mechanism, not just the prescription pad. Before we go any further, one thing needs to be said plainly. The cracking sound itself, on its own, is not always the problem. Joints can make noise for entirely harmless reasons. Gas bubbles releasing inside synovial fluid, tendons shifting slightly over bony surfaces. If your knees crack and feel completely fine, that sound alone may mean little. But if the cracking arises with stiffness that takes time to clear each morning, if there is a dull ache that builds as the day goes on, if going downstairs now feels noticeably worse than going up, if you started unconsciously changing how you move, favoring one side, avoiding certain chairs, skipping walks you used to take without a second thought, then the sound is a signal, and what follows is for you. The standard explanation goes like this. Cartilage is a smooth white tissue that cushions the ends of bones inside the knee joint. Over time, through use, through impact, through age, it wears down. Less cushion means more friction. More friction means grinding and pain. That framework is not wrong. It is incomplete. And the gap in that explanation is where most people spend years, sometimes decades, treating the wrong target. Here's the question that framework never answers. Why does cartilage degrade faster in some people than others? Why does a 72-year-old who has walked every day of his adult life sometimes have healthier knees than a 58-year-old who has spent most of his career sitting? Why do siblings with identical genetics develop completely different joint outcomes by the time they reach their 60s? The answer is not exercise history. It is internal chemistry. And internal chemistry can be changed. The factor most people assume is primarily responsible, the mechanical wear, the grinding repetition of decades of use, is only one piece and not the most important one. Think of your knee joint like a precision hinge. The hinge itself, the architecture, the bone surface is fine. What it requires to function is a very specific lubricating fluid called synovial fluid. That fluid does not merely reduce friction, it carries nutrients directly into the cartilage. Cartilage has no blood supply of its own, none. It is fed entirely by the fluid surrounding it. Every time you move your knee, you pump nutrients in and waste products out, the way a sponge absorbs and releases water with each compression. When the composition of that fluid changes, when the molecules that maintain its viscosity and nutrient-carrying capacity disappear, the cartilage starves, silently, over years. By the time you feel a grinding under you, that deficit has been running for a long time. So what depletes that fluid? What changes its composition? That is where the 5 internal factors live, and we're going to walk through every one of them. Before we do, one thing must be said clearly. If your knee pain is sudden and severe, if one knee is significantly more swollen than the other and warm to the touch, if you have experienced a fall or direct trauma recently, or if your knee is actually locking, freezing mid-movement, stop this video and get a clinical evaluation today. Those are different conversations. What we're discussing here is chronic progressive joint change. Acute injury, infection, and structural damage from trauma require hands-on assessment. The first factor is the one named in the title, and I want you to understand exactly why it matters at a biochemical level, not as a vague wellness claim, but as a precise mechanism. Magnesium is involved in more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body. But for your joint specifically, it performs 3 functions that nothing else can replicate. First, it regulates calcium distribution. This is critical and almost never explained correctly. Calcium is what makes bones dense and hard, but calcium requires direction. It must be guided into bone tissue where it belongs and actively kept out of soft tissue where it causes damage. Without magnesium acting as a regulator, calcium deposits in the wrong locations, in arterial walls, in tendons, and inside the cartilage itself, forming tiny calcified deposits that act like embedded sandpaper, grinding against the joint surface with every step. Second, magnesium activates vitamin D. Vitamin D cannot function, cannot influence calcium metabolism, cannot regulate the immune cells inside joint tissue without magnesium to convert it into its biologically active form. This is why millions of people take vitamin D supplements faithfully for years and see no meaningful change. The supplement is inert without the mineral that processes it. Third, magnesium directly suppresses the inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines, the same molecules that drive chronic, low-grade inflammation inside the joint, the inflammation that breaks down cartilage from the inside. Now here is the problem. Research published in the journal Nutrients found that approximately 48% of Americans consume less magnesium than their estimated daily requirement. In adults over 60, that percentage rises further because aging reduces intestinal absorption efficiency regardless of dietary intake. And one of the most widely prescribed drug categories in America, proton pump inhibitors, taken by tens of millions of people daily for acid reflux, is clinically documented to significantly deplete serum magnesium levels with long-term use. If you have been on a PPI for more than 1 year, your magnesium status deserves a blood test. Beyond medication, soil mineral depletion from decades of industrial agriculture means that the dark leafy greens on your plate today contain measurably less magnesium than the same vegetables contained in 1970. Research published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition documented a 24% decline in the magnesium content of common vegetables between 1950 and 1999. You did not stop eating the food. The food stopped containing the mineral. What do you do about it? 2 tablespoons of raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds daily, one of the most bioavailable dietary sources of magnesium available. Dark chocolate at 85% cacao or higher, 1 small square per day. A cup of properly brewed nettle leaf tea. And if you are on a proton pump inhibitor, a conversation with whoever manages your care about your current magnesium level is not optional. It is overdue. The second factor explains something that confuses people enormously. Why calcium supplements taken faithfully for years sometimes appear to make joint problems worse rather than better. Vitamin K2, not K1, which is the clotting vitamin found abundantly in leafy greens, but K2 specifically is the molecular traffic director for calcium in your body. It activates 2 proteins, one that pulls calcium into bone tissue where it builds density, and one that actively removes calcium from soft tissue where it accumulates and causes harm. Without adequate K2, calcium circulates freely. It follows concentration gradients rather than biological intent. It deposits in arterial walls, which is why low K2 status is associated with arterial stiffness and cardiovascular risk. And it deposits in joint cartilage and the tendons surrounding the knee, contributing directly to the grinding sensation and the loss of smooth, frictionless movement. Research published in Osteoporosis International found that higher dietary K2 intake was associated with significantly lower rates of cartilage degradation markers in adults over 55. K2 is found almost exclusively in fermented foods and the fat of grass-fed animals. The most concentrated source is natto, a Japanese fermented soybean product available in Asian grocery stores. Egg yolks from pasture-raised hens, aged hard cheeses, Gouda and Brie, contain more K2 than most other varieties. A small daily portion of any of these provides meaningful intake. If you are taking warfarin or any anticoagulant medication, increasing K2 intake requires a direct conversation with your prescriber before you begin. This is non-negotiable. The third factor operates inside the joint itself, specifically in the composition of the synovial fluid that feeds the cartilage. Healthy synovial fluid has a consistency that sits somewhere between water and honey. That viscosity, that resistance, that cushioning quality depends on a long-chain molecule called hyaluronic acid. Think of the difference between water and honey moving through a narrow channel. Water offers no resistance, no cushion, no ability to absorb impact. The gel-like quality of healthy synovial fluid is precisely what allows a knee joint to bear the full load of the body through thousands of steps without transferring that stress directly to the cartilage surface. Hyaluronic acid production inside joint tissue requires two specific raw materials, the amino acids glycine and proline, which are the building blocks of collagen, and adequate vitamin C, which is the rate-limiting step in collagen synthesis. Without vitamin C, the collagen production chain stops regardless of how much glycine and proline are available. As people age and shift toward diets lower in connective tissue-rich foods, glycine intake drops significantly. Modern diets favor muscle meat almost exclusively. 100 years ago, the entire animal was consumed. Bones, joints, skin, organs. The collagen precursors were a constant part of daily nutrition. That is no longer the case. What do? Real bone broth, long simmered, not the powdered variety, provides glycine and proline in their most bioavailable form, 1 cup daily. A red bell pepper or a kiwi fruit with each meal provides more usable vitamin C than an orange with significantly less sugar load. Vitamin C is water soluble. It is used and excreted daily and must be consistently replenished. The fourth factor threads through every mechanism we have discussed, because without it, each of the preceding systems operates at a fraction of its capacity. Research published in the New England Journal of Medicine estimated that vitamin D deficiency, serum levels below 20 nanograms per milliliter, was present in more than 1 billion people worldwide, with adults over 60 among the highest risk groups. In the United States specifically, surveys suggest that more than 70% of adults over 65 have insufficient or deficient levels. Vitamin D regulates the immune cells inside joint tissue, specifically the macrophages and T cells that, when improperly activated, drive the inflammatory destruction of cartilage matrix. It supports the structured deposition of calcium into bone, and critically, as discussed, it requires magnesium to convert into its biologically active form. Supplementing vitamin D without addressing magnesium first is like pouring water into a pipe that has no connection to the system. The body synthesizes vitamin D through UVB light on skin. After the age of 60, this synthesis becomes dramatically less efficient. An adult over 65 produces approximately 75% less vitamin D from the same sun exposure as a 25-year-old because the skin's concentration of the precursor molecule decreases with age. Dietary sources: wild-caught salmon, 100 grams of which provides approximately the full daily requirement. Sardines, inexpensive, often overlooked, and simultaneously rich in vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and calcium. Egg yolks from pasture-raised hens. 15 minutes of midday sun exposure on forearms and face between April and September without sunscreen on those areas is sufficient for endogenous synthesis on most skin types. The fifth factor can quietly undo every single protocol from the 4 preceding ones. I want to say that directly because the clinical picture is consistent. Every dietary change made correctly, every nutritional gap addressed, and the joints continuing to worsen because this mechanism is running at full strength in the background. That factor is cortisol, the hormone of chronic, habitual, daily stress. Here is the specific pathway as it applies to your joints. Cortisol suppresses the activity of chondrocytes, the specialized cells whose only job is to maintain and regenerate the cartilage matrix. Under sustained cortisol elevation, chondrocyte synthesis rates fall measurably. The cells that should be continuously laying down fresh cartilage slow down and eventually become unresponsive. The cartilage that breaks down is not being replaced at the rate it normally would be. Simultaneously, and this is documented in multiple clinical studies, cortisol drives the kidneys to excrete magnesium at an accelerated rate. Every episode of sustained stress, every night of inadequate sleep, every hour of low-grade anxiety that has simply become the background of daily life is causing active magnesium loss through urine. This is one of the primary mechanisms of magnesium depletion in adults who eat reasonably well but are chronically stressed. And cortisol directly amplifies the production of inflammatory cytokines, the same molecules that attack the cartilage surface. People living under chronic stress show measurably faster cartilage degradation than people with identical dietary habits and exercise patterns who are not under comparable stress loads. This is not a soft observation. It is consistent across rheumatological research literature. The specific tool: slow diaphragmatic breathing using the 4-7-8 pattern. Sit or lie comfortably. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Breathe from the belly, not the chest. Hold at the top for a count of 7 without strain. Exhale fully and slowly through your mouth for a count of 8. Long, complete, audible. 4 full cycles, 2 minutes total. This activates the vagus nerve, the primary conductor of the parasympathetic nervous system, and produces measurable decreases in circulating cortisol within minutes. Practice consistently before sleep each night. It improves slow-wave sleep quality, which is the phase during which chondrocytes perform their most active repair work. This is not a replacement for the nutritional work. It is the capstone without which the nutritional work leaks. From the outside in, not as a substitute for the internal work, but as its complement. The most important external tool for joint health is not a cream or a rub. It is timed movement and fluid priming. Every morning, before your feet touch the floor, do 10 slow ankle circles in each direction, then 10 gentle knee-to-chest movements while lying on your back. Bring each knee up slowly. Hold for 3 seconds. Lower slowly. This takes 90 seconds. What it does: it pumps synovial fluid back into the cartilage surface before you load the joint with your full body weight. Cartilage that is properly hydrated before you stand absorbs the first impacts of the day completely differently from cartilage that has been compressed and idle for 8 hours and is suddenly asked to carry weight. Then, a warm compress on both knees for 8 minutes before your first walk of the day. Warm, approximately body temperature. This increases local circulation and temporarily improves the viscosity of synovial fluid, making the lubricant more mechanically effective during the first hour of activity. Week 1. Preparation. Begin the morning mobilization protocol. 1 cup of real bone broth daily. 2 tablespoons of raw pumpkin seeds. Eliminate carbonated soft drinks and processed deli meats from your daily routine. Both contain phosphate compounds that actively interfere with magnesium absorption. Begin the 4-7-8 breathing practice before sleep. Week 2. Activation. Add the K2 food sources, a portion of aged Gouda or Brie, or 1 pasture-raised egg yolk daily. Add vitamin C with every meal, red bell pepper, kiwi, fresh parsley. Add wild-caught sardines or salmon twice per week. Begin 10 minutes of slow, flat surface walking each morning. Week 3, observation. The first thing that typically improves is the duration of morning stiffness, not the disappearance of sound. The stiffness window shortens, 15 minutes instead of 30, 10 instead of 15. Note it, measure it. That shortening is the lubricant system beginning to respond. Week 4 onward, consolidation. Cartilage matrix repair is a slow process measured in months, but the synovial fluid quality, the viscosity and nutrient content of the joint's internal environment begins shifting within 3 to 4 weeks of consistent nutritional support. The structural changes follow as the environment sustains them. One additional tool that costs nothing and takes 10 minutes. Slow, deliberate walking on flat ground. Not exercise, not speed. Full foot contact, unhurried, daily. This is the minimum mechanical stimulus the joint requires to pump synovial fluid through the cartilage. The cartilage feeds through movement. Complete rest is not protective. It is the opposite. Total immobility is what starves the joint. Now, I want to ask you something directly. How old are you? Write it in the comments right now. Not because of curiosity, but because the age of this audience shapes what this channel covers next. The protocol for someone at 58 is different from the protocol for someone at 74. The urgency differs. The mechanisms shift. That number matters for what comes next here. And where are you watching this from? Which city, which state, which country? Leave it below. I want to see how far this conversation is reaching, because what we've discussed today is not expensive. It does not require a procedure or a prescription. It requires understanding what is actually happening inside the joint and giving the body what it needs to do the work it is already trying to do. If someone you love is shuffling to the kitchen every morning, holding the counter, waiting for their knees to remember how to move, send them this video. The explanation they were given is not wrong. It is incomplete. And the gap in that explanation is exactly where the solution lives. Like this video if it gave you something you didn't have before. Subscribe so the next one finds you. The joint that cracked this morning is not old. It is under-supported. Those are not the same thing.